Hi. Well, thank you for coming to my talk Friday at 4 o'clock. I didn't expect these many people. As a result, could give you all the referrals if you want. My name is Mohit Sarveiya. I'm a GD in Kotlin and Android, and my heart rate is 120. So I'm going to talk about a controversial topic, but controversy is good sometimes. I'll talk about sharing UIs. And the good news is I won't talk about React Native or Flutter. I'll talk about Kotlin multi-platform. How many of you use Kotlin multi-platform? That's great. Everyone up front, and hopefully people in the back sometime soon. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about how do you share UIs, between Android and iOS. Why would you want to do that? I'm going to talk about the internals and how it supports iOS. I'm going to talk about interoperability with iOS. So one thing is that yesterday it was a great presentation by Sebastian, who host of Talking Kotlin. If you don't watch the podcast, I watch it or listen to it. And he talked about, he gave a really good demo, and which is about building how do you share code? He actually built an app in which he shared code, and he was using Compose, in iOS and Android. And my presentation is supplemental, which is I talk more about interoperability, talk about more about from an iOS perspective, right? Obviously, you got to convince the iOS person to do this. You can't, it's not just about Android. So in the world of Kotlin multi-platform, so far people have been able to share their API logic, like with Ktor, caching with SQLite, and they share their business logic. But now you could write composable functions and UI components, and you could share them between iOS and Android. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is the screenshot of the GitHub with dark mode. And you could see that you got iOS is in alpha, web is in experimental. I'm going to focus on Android and iOS because it's DroidCon. So there are two approaches you could take. One approach you could take, which you build a app from the ground up, fully in Compose, and you're sharing code. Well, shout out to my friend J-Rod right there. He showed up. Thank you, my colleague. So this is good for a greenfield project, right? But not everyone does a greenfield project, right? I'm sure all of you work on big teams, right? Like at Peloton, for example, we used to work there, and then somewhere else. So what if, imagine you have an app, you have your design system built out in Swift UI and in Compose, and you want to share a piece of the screen, not the whole thing, right? And I've been in that situation where I've thought about doing that. I've been building, like a very complex UI. I won't share that here because it's too complex. Share something simple. So imagine you want to share one UI. So these are two approaches. What I'm going to focus on is how do you share individual components. And for this presentation, I did my homework, and I basically built a sample app. I wanted to learn Swift UI. If I don't get a job as an Android engineer, I could make it as an iOS engineer. And it's good to, in this job market, to have multiple skill sets, right? And I built an app. I'm very proud of it. And it's just a Swift UI app, displays a list of images, and it also displays a details page. And I thought, why not convert a piece of UI in this sample app to learn about Kotlin multi-platform? And so what I'm going to do is to convert this list, which hits an endpoint and displays these list of images. but I'm going to keep everything around it, all the scaffolding of the navigation and the toolbar and all that. I want to keep all of that. So now when you think about this example, it might look too simple because it's just displaying a linear list of things. But a more complicated example, for example, for me is that what if you're working on something which is like an Instagram story style editor where you could add things to it, right? Now you get into more, gestures, right? That's a complicated piece of a feature. That makes much more sense to share. You don't have to share everything between Android and iOS. Every UI component depends on the use case, what's important, right? What gives you the most impact. It's also about cutting time in development and between Android and iOS. So there's just some Swift UI code. It's okay. I could see the looks like on that guy and that guy. Like, why are you showing Swift UI at a DroidCon conference? Because I want to. Why not have fun giving presentations? So on a Friday. So here you have a Z stack, where Z is a Z index, obviously, And over here, this thing here displays a list, this whole list right here, and this Z stack. And what makes me so happy, I learned about the task API right there, which is lifecycle aware, kind of like launches a coroutine, like get images, and then it displays them in this for each thing here. And now the goal is to be able, I'm going to convert that to a composable function, that thing. Now, the thing is that all of this is wrapped around other Swift UI code for the navigation, for the toolbar, and I want to keep all of that. I want to just be able to plug in my composable function, be able to plug it in. And this is the goal, right? I want to be able to call a method compose view, and everything underneath that is written in compose. Now the question becomes, how do they bridge that? How do they bridge the compose world to this Swift UI world, right? So, and I'm going to share with you APIs and utilities that JetBrains built. So there is a really nice template, and it says here, use this template, and you use it. And I know I used it, and I ran the app, and it built, and that's a good thing. And it is, and I built it in Android Studio, and that was a good thing. So the structure that the structure that you get of the app looks something like this. It has desktop, but who cares about desktop? I removed that. So you got Android app, iOS app, and you have shared folder. So. And when you go and share, this is where we're going to add our code, shared code, common Android main, iOS main. And then, oh, by the way, I hand drew these icons because I'm very proud of that in Keynote. So in the build script, you're going to add in your plugin like this, and then you're going to add in your dependencies, your common dependencies. The material theme is supported, Compose Foundations is supported, all the nice things. I don't do demos because yesterday Sebastian's demo, there was something happen. I don't want to experience that. My heart rate would be about 200. So, yeah. So let's talk about how do you do this. So how do you build this? How do you build this compose view? This is, look at this. You start off by building your app theme, just as you would in Compose. Dark mode, light mode, and then you build your composable function, the images list. But then you have these layers. You need a view controller in this Swift UI world. How do you create this? Well, the API helps you with their utilities that helps you with to build this. I'm going to start from the bottom and go all the way up, all right? Just like subway map. Okay. So let's look at theme. This I copied from a sample where you have a light theme and a dark theme, and then you got a composable function, you give it your content, and then you do this thing right here called the material theme. So this has Kotlin multi-platform support, right? So we're going to use this theme in our shared composable function method. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to bridge that world? And in order to do that, first thing we need in iOS is to be able to create this struct and forget about this long thing here and whatever that means. So what this basically struct is going to have is a method that returns a UI controller. And how are we going to create this UI controller, which is what I'm going to show you. So this image list is a method that going to return a UI controller, and this compose UI view controller is the utility that's provided, which is the bridge that acts from the Swift UI world and Compose world. And where is this defined? Where is the core utilities defined for how all this works? So I showed you a screenshot of the Compose multi-platform repo. It depends on another repo, which is a fork on GitHub called Kotlin multi-platform core. And that's where all of the juice is, the secret recipe. So, shout out to my friend Sumaya who came in. Thank you. So this is the, you can see there are commits being made. This is a fork. And how does this work? So this creates a UI view controller. Underneath the hood, this uses Skia for drawing, basically on iOS. And I'll show you more what I mean by that. So the Compose UI controller sets up a window. And that's where all the magic happens, where it sets up recomposition, what drawing it should have, etc. And it takes in, basically you're injecting in your composable function, your content. And so this is the utility that you're going to use, that you're using. The next thing you need to do is actually create your images list. So I'm using that Compose UI view controller, and it takes in a Lambda, and I'm passing in what I want to display. In this case, I'm going to start off just by saying hello world. So when I run this code, right? When I run this code, it looks like this, looks horrible. So basically, in Xcode, I ran Xcode for this, and it's a beautiful thing. So when I run Xcode, in Xcode you could view the hierarchy, and you could view what things look like, what windows are in each of the layers. And this is what it looks like. So when you look at, this is the hierarchy. So UI window, Compose window we looked at, and all the bottom you'll see any type of composer function you use on iOS, you'll always see this hierarchy. You'll see a Seco UI view. And the question is, what is Seco? Does anybody know what Seco is? That's great. I know. Oh, you do? He knows, but that's no surprise. So Seco is a Skia bindings for Kotlin, hence the term Seco. So I hope I pronounced that right, Seco. So this is the library, and this contains Kotlin multi-platform bindings for the Skia to be able to draw things on it, and it's utilizing that underneath the hood. So the way that works is, this is at KotlinConf, they shared a fancier version of this, but I don't have a fancy version. So it's basically, this is the architecture right here. You have utilities to be able to bridge this world to this world, Swift UI world, UI kit world. And right at the bottom of this utility, you have something called Compose Scene, in which all the magic is being done to be able to render things as recompositions are happening. So let me share with you what I mean by that. So when you go to Compose window, you'll see that it takes in a content, which is whatever you want to compose a function, the UI that you want to show. And so this is what I want to show right here, a simple hello world. And the way Seco works is that it creates a layer. It creates a layer between what you want to show and the actual UI. And you can see it creates a UI view and adds it as a sub view. And then basically you can see there, it sets up composition locale providers, and it takes in what you want to show, like this. This is where the magic happens. It's good to read source code, right? Right, oh, someone laughed. Okay, so basically that's how that simple code works underneath the hood. It uses Skia underneath the hood, just like Android. And I brought that up because one of my friends said that she would expecting it to show Z-stack and all those primitives, but it's actually Skia underneath the hood. So now when you look at this, how do I get the data? And this is the favorite part of my presentation, favorite part of this presentation, where how do I show those list of images, and rather than showing a hello world. So, and how do you do that? So the architecture, what I'm going to do for this view is that I'm going to share the view model, and the repo, just like Sebastian did. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently. But what I'm going to do is set up an architecture like this, where the view model talks to the repo, you get a response back, and you give the UI state to the view, and you could push events to the view model, right? But bear with me, this looks common, right? Something all of you do. Well, what I'm going to use to set up my view model or presenter, I'm going to use Molecule. And Molecule is a library, and that I presented on last year. At the same time at 4 o'clock, different location, better location. So, no, this location is good too. So this library allows you to create a stream of UI states that I want to show to the UI, right? And why did I include this? Because this has multi-platform support. You could use it on iOS, you could use it on Android, and the way it works is that you have a presenter and you hook it up to the Compose runtime, right? And you're basically, when you hook it up, what the library does is that it creates a state flow, and whenever a recomposition happens, it pushes a new state to the state flow, pushes it out when you're listening to it. So it uses something called a frame clock, which is presented by this nice icon in Keynote. And basically you give it, your logic, your method, your presenter, for example, a view model that returns a UI state. And basically what happens is that whenever a frame in the clock gets, pushed out, is going to push from this presenter model, whatever you want, to the state flow. So it all depends on that monatomic frame clock. I bring that up because you can't use the same frame clock as you would on Android. This library provides one for iOS and Mac OS, for example. So this library has multi-platform support for these versions, like Android, all versions, JS, JVM, iOS, Mac OS, right? So how many of you actually use this library? How many of you use Molecule? Just this one person. Okay. In addition to this library, I want to use view models, but I want them to be lifecycle aware. So Sebastian taught me about this library called Moco. and this is one of the libraries. There's also a library called Decompose. Anyone use Moco? I got a new person there. You're my best friend. And what about Decompose? Man, okay. That's okay. So what I'm going to do is create a UI state, a loading state, success state, error state. It's interesting, when I made that joke, Sebastian had a grin on his face. And that was good. So what I'm going to create for this presentation, something I'm proud of, that one of my colleague created, shout out to him, Chris Horner from Australia, is an abstract molecule view model. I want to be able to utilize this for any type of view model. And basically what it is basically a model and an event. And basically it's a coroutine scope that you create, and you add in a frame clock to it. And this library provides you with a frame clock that for iOS called display link clock. You know who made that? Do you know who made that display link clock? All of you know who made that. No, Jake Wharton. So, it uses this timer object, CA display link, basically, to be able to drive the monatomic clock. And I'm going to add that to the context, basically. So I'm grabbing here the view model scope context, and I'm adding it to the context. in coroutines, right? You could add things to the context using the plus operator. So basically, what I'm then going to do, this is the frame clock that's provided to you by the library, this display link clock. And basically, what I'm going to do is launch a molecule. What this does is that what scope.launch does is provides me with a state flow, right? How many people use coroutines? Hey, that's good. That means that what I'm saying, hopefully you understand. So this provides you with a state flow, not a shared flow, right? And basically, what models is a method in which you have your logic that determines what UI state you're going to give, right? And it calls this method right here for you whenever a recomposition, in here, when a recomposition happens, it will push to the state flow right here, this one right here. So this is called launching a molecule. And the great thing is this is a multi-platform. It works on iOS. I tested it out for this presentation. And basically, that right there allows you to push state out, right? What if you want to read events in from your UI, right? What if you want to delete an image, for example? So what you could do is create a shared flow like this, in which you could push events to and you could read from. So basically, it looks like this. There's a take method in which you could error, for example, when you try to emit. And this allows you to push externally from the UI any type of events by using this method. So what this allows me to do is that it allows me to, using Moco and Molecule, I could share the view model, the repo with Ktor, and also the view. So basically, I'm going to create finally my images view model, which uses my molecule view model. And I'm going to use this models method like this. And I'm going to write out my logic in there that I'm going to have my UI state, which is for loading. I'm going to do launched effect with the unit. And I'm going to tell the repo, give me the images. And I'm going to specify my UI state that I have my images. You could obviously want to set up error handling there. And I'm going to return the UI state. This is my logic. It could be complicated based on your use case. And so this is something that's really good because you don't have to, what you don't have to do is do a lot of combines between multiple streams. It's very imperative what your logic is that's inside of this models method. If you try to do it the other way where you could specify a state flow yourself, then you get into that hairy area of logic where you're combining multiple streams together. So what I'm going to do here is get an instance of my view model, and Moco provides a view model factory that allows me to do that. And so I have an instance of my view model, and then I'm going to basically get a UI state in there, and I'm going to provide it to my images list. And this is all in my composable function, which is shared between iOS and Android, right? So the next question is, how do you create the view itself? How do you handle images, for example? Handling images is now most people, how many of you use Coil? That's great. I want to ask the other question, but I will not ask that question. So Coil is not multi-platform yet. There was a grant. Grants are good, free money is good. And, but there are other libraries like Camel, with a K. Sebastian taught me about Camel. And in which you could use to display images. So over here, all of you should know what this is. How many of you use Compose every day? How many of you use Compose? Oh, that's good. At least you know what this is. So I'm using a lazy vertical grid, and I'm going to use this library called Camel, which is very simple to use. I just provided an image path and set the content scale. From an Android perspective, this becomes really trivial. It's not really interesting. The only interesting part is the iOS perspective, that bridge that I showed you, right? So when I set that up and I run the code, it displays these images of Amsterdam, right? Look at this. Went to Colin Conf in Amsterdam. And it was great. So that's the architecture that I chose. You know, you could play around with it. People have different opinions on it. And of sharing your view model repo. You could do it another way where you don't share any of this. You just share the repo and you give it the data from this iOS side and the Android side. You could also do that. There's no, I'm very flexible for a person. Good to be flexible. So the next and last thing I want to talk about is iOS interoperability. And I'm going to show you examples of open source app, how they solve actual problems. I'll show you more examples of interoperability. And I promise this will be the last thing, because it's 4 o'clock, 4:46. And what I showed you before was how to use Compose in Swift UI. But what if you want to do it the other way? What if you have a Compose component in Compose, but there's a piece of Swift UI you actually want to use inside of that? And that becomes interesting, isn't it? If you want to go the other way. And what if you, how do you use Swift UI in Compose, right? So here I have imagine you have a simple view, a column, right? And I have a text in the middle, view in Compose. And I want to display basically a Swift UI view, which has a border of blue, my favorite color, blue and black. So, which has this text. And how do I display that? So, how do I get that to work? So there's a way you could do in which you set up your Compose view, you set up the UI view controller, and there's a factory that they provide in which you could inject in whatever Swift UI view you want to show. So there's a way to do that. And I thought that was neat. Let me give you an example. Suppose you had an app screen like this, and it's Lambda, I have a Lambda right here, which returns a particular UI view. And I want to be able to show that. So I'm utilizing that utility again, Compose UI view controller. I have my column, right? And right here is I'm using this other utility called UI kit view, and I'm passing in this Lambda. And this thing here knows what to do. How do you show that Swift UI view? So the way this works is that in my iOS app, basically I'm going to create a struct UI controller representable, and I'm basically going to call this app screen method, and in the Lambda over here I'm going to provide, so this is Swift UI code, it's vstack, for example, right here, and whatever text I want to show, and it knows how to handle this right here as I showed you in the app screen. And when I run that, it looks like this. And I think that's neat. And so the other example, last one that I want to show, has to do with how do you use UI kit in Compose, not Swift UI. So there's a sample app. How many of you know Chris Baines? All right, that was great. Lewis knows. And this is the TV app. And I never use it, but I read the code in it. And basically, the TV app it looks like this, and it has a problem that Chris worked on. He tweeted about this. You follow him, all of you. So where basically you have a modal. The modal is displayed in Compose. And what Chris worked on is that how do you, when you click on this time, how do you display a native component that has an iOS feel to it, right? And in order to do that, so he wants to display something like this, which is has a more iOS feel to it. So how do you do that? So what he did, and this is a good example of using expect and actual declarations in which they are marked as composable, right? This is a good example for that. And basically, I'm going to declare one in my common, and then I'm going to declare an actual one in my Android and iOS source sets. So here's an example of where I'm going to provide a custom time picker dialog that looks different, and for Android and iOS. In the Android version, I'm going to use the material theme version. In the iOS version, I'm going to use a UI kit version. It's great you're taking a picture. That means I said something good. So basically, in the actual version, it looks like this. And it's basically where am I? This is the iOS version. In the iOS version, I'm going to create a date picker view controller. Or this is what Chris did. He's smart. So in there, basically what it does is that I could utilize, because I have access to bindings, right, in Kotlin multi-platform to UIKit. So I have access to stack view, date picker, the native components. I could go ahead and provide those and build a UI from them. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding them as subviews in this UI view controller. So what that does is that figures out like how to create this time picker dialog from an iOS perspective. But what about from Android? And Android is pretty simple. I'm using the material D date picker dialog. And when I run that code and you compare between iOS and Android, it will show you the native, basically whatever is native to the system. Now that's an example of how to provide like different pieces of UI that are particular to a particular platform. And yeah, so that's the solution to this problem. So those are different ways, and there are examples in the JetBrains repo, samples on all of these, on how to do all of these. So this morning, I was commuting from New Jersey. How many of you are from New Jersey? That's good, not a lot of you sucks. When I was commuting and I was on Twitter, and 4 hours ago, this got released. And so Kotlin multi-platform 1.5.10 came out, a preview, and it has really nice add-ons, the dialogue. So the app for this conference has in its setting a way to load the UI in iOS. And there's a bug in there. You should find it in the text, but they're working on it. I think that's one of the change logs for this release. And you should try it out. You know, in life it's good to try for once everything, right? Someone said that. And there's a roadmap, because there's always work to be done. And they're working on navigation. There are libraries, navigation libraries. One could argue, are they like frameworks? But so they're also working on improving text selection, like that bug in the DroidCon app. Accessibility is important. Dialog pop-ups, you need more of those. So that's my presentation. There's last thing I want to say. So I presented here last year, you know, fewer people, same time slot. And there's one thing I wanted to change from 1 year, going from 1 year to another. There's one thing I wanted to change that had nothing to do with writing code. Because for me, just like all of you guys, I've been defined by giving presentations or writing code or having X amount of credentials or working or about where you work. And I said to myself, I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to prove something about my health. I'm going to set myself a goal that when I get to this period in September, I'm going to lose weight. And I lost 35 pounds. So now I need to set another goal for next year. And thank you for clapping. That was good. Thank you. It was not easy. Lots of fasting. Became a vegetarian. And I want to say thank you. I want to say that you could go to my website. I talk about other things, talk about coroutines. And I'm still on Twitter, but I got the wrong icon. And I'm on Mastodon with the same handle. And that's about it. Thank you so much.